This is the Let's Go Win podcast with your host, J.M. Ryerson.
What is happening, you guys? Welcome back to Let's Go Win podcast. This gentleman I'm about to bring on is wildly entertaining. He is extremely sharp and his story is radical. Dr. Richard Shuster is a clinical psychologist, TEDx speaker, and a CEO of Your Success Insights, which helps individuals, corporations, and athletes achieve balance and peak performance. He's also the host of the Daily Helping with Dr. Richard Shuster, Food for the Brain, Knowledge from the Experts, Tools to Win at Life, which is regularly downloaded in over 150 countries. Dr. Schuster's clinical expertise and podcasts have been featured in such publications as the Huffington Post, NBCnews.com, Men's Health, Cosmopolitan, and others. He is also the president of Every Kid Rocks, Inc., a 501c3, which helps schools provide therapy services to children. Dr. Richard, what is up, my brother? How you doing?
Man, JM, now we've set the bar high and there's a lot of pressure on me to give some value to your audience. So I'm excited to be here. I think we're going to have an awesome discussion today.
I guarantee it's going to be awesome because I was fortunate enough to be on your show. You lead an amazing show. You do, as I told you off air, so many of the things that I'm terrible at, which I really value in another human being. But this whole what you do and the assessments, tell me how we got to this point, Dr. Richard. How did we get to what you do? Because it's a cool story and I don't even know how to lead into other than ask that and say, go.
So I would say that there's really two major parts to the story, if you want to delve into my superhero origin, if you will. So when I was in my early 20s, I bid on and won a government defense contract that I had no business winning whatsoever. And this wasn't selling bombs. This was software for the medical division of the Army. But as a young man who was completely going up the wrong alley, barking up the wrong tree, this made me worse as a human being, because I was already focused on none of the things that were important, right? Very focused on status and glory. I use the term glory all the time, and having stuff for the sake of stuff. I remember when I got this contract, then I started going on eBay and researching private islands I was going to buy myself. And you could buy islands on eBay. It's really crazy. I was going to name it Schuster Land. Like, this is how arrogant and narcissistic I was. And so I'm moving along in this company. Extraordinary things are going to happen to me. And then I'm just a regular Saturday. So I thought I was in a car accident in which I broke my spine and almost died. And so as a clinician with the hindsight, and actually this was about 20 years, almost to the day that this happened to me. So it's ironic that we're sitting here today talking about this, JM. The accident did a lot of things for me. And there's a phenomenon, we see this in soldiers. We have records of this dating back decades of soldiers in war. There's a phenomenon known as tachypsychia. And what that does is, think Neo in the Matrix, right? Dodging those bullets. It basically slows your perception of time. So from when this car slams into me and I'm sent into oncoming traffic and my airbag is deployed, and ultimately I crash into a telephone pole at full speed, which is what broke my momentum. Think maybe 3 seconds, JM. But in that amount of time, it was literally surreal, all in slow motion. I could see my windshield shatter and these little bits of glass floating in slow motion and the light of the sun reflecting off of them. I'm looking down and I see my center console and it's slowly crushing into my rib cage, like somebody took a can of Coke and was crushing in their hand. No pain sensation, just things I was observing. And in that moment, I knew I was dead. I knew I was going to die. And I became overwhelmed with guilt because I knew my parents were going to get this call. Saturday night, they're out with friends. Everybody's having fun. Their son is dead, right? That's the call they're going to get. And I'm thinking about this car that had just a few payments left on it. I'm thinking about my watch that, I didn't need to have a watch like that. And I'm realizing that none of these things really matter. They don't. And, I wasn't pleading to God, oh, dear God, let me live. I'm going to be a good human being. Like, no, I just was like, this is it. And this sucks. And I'm going to the grave. It sucks that I had this realization right when I'm about to die. And, spoiler alert, like I didn't die, but I did break my spine and was told that there's a lot of things I would never do again. And, I've always been motivated by people who tell me I can't do something because then I go do it. And I recovered. It took me a while, but I recovered. And that began this journey to where I really was finding what are the things that fired me, that got me excited. And as my company grew, because I did go back to work eventually, I became miserable. I was more and more depressed. And ultimately, I walked away from it because it was making me physically ill. And it was ultimately this very bizarre set of circumstances where I was at a grocery store and I heard these women talking about their teenage daughters on MySpace, right? So that tells you how long ago this was. And I just interjected into their conversation, and the only reason I left the house was because I needed food. Like I was at that point in my life wallowing in misery and rehashing all of the events of my business and why did I make this life choice and my future sucks and all of these things. If Instacart had existed then, I don't know what I'd be doing now, honestly. But I'm in this grocery store. I tell these ladies, okay, if you want to keep your kids safe, I have some experience in network safety and technology, do X, Y, and Z. And I freaked them out. I didn't mean to, but I totally freaked them out. They told me come speak to their PTA. I did. I had no agenda. I wasn't trying to sell anything, right? But it felt good. And it was like that, like a dimmer switch and a little bit of light for the first time in my soul in a long time was lighting up. And that set me down this path of helping others. I got a master's in social work. I worked with Hurricane Katrina victims when that happened back in the day. And then I was just excited to continue learning how I can help people. And so I was exposed to assessments, which is kind of like a full circle thing. And we'll get back to that. And I pursued my doctorate in clinical psychology. I got advanced training in forensic and neuropsychology. And that's really kind of phase one of my transformation. And so, for many, many years, I always tell people like version 2.0 of me came from that accident. And I was there really until about last year when version 3 came around.
Yeah. So obviously you've been defined, the little I have had the chance to talk to you, really been defined by these momentous things that happen in life, these perspective pieces that you're given. So, I mean, shoot, almost dying at such a young age and seeing your life flash in front of your face. You're thinking, all right, now I got to figure it out. I'm going to go help a lot of people. But we needed one more wake up call is what's coming. And I'm really, again, I don't want to be the spoiler alert guy, but it's pretty radical what you go through. And I'm fascinated. I can't wait to hear you tell this story as well, because you are helping so many people, yet you weren't necessarily helping the one person that needed it. So go from there, brother.
Yeah, the irony, that's the greatest irony of all this. And so, as I got out into the real world, I'm a doctor and I've got my practice and I'm working with patients, and I was happy for a few months. And then I realized I just felt this higher calling, and I decided to start a podcast. I didn't know what I was doing. Nobody mentored me on this. And I bought a microphone on Amazon, and I just would get up at 4:30 in the morning and just start emailing famous people and asking them if they would come on this show that didn't exist from my personal email address. Like I didn't even have a professional domain. That's how ridiculous this was. And so eventually people said yes. Most said no. Almost all of them said no if they replied at all. But I would start getting some momentum there. And really early on, you mentioned NBC.com. That was one of the early things that happened for me. And they really put me on the map, because overnight, I went from a pretty small audience and reach to there are people all over the world in really big numbers pulling my show. And I was floored, because that wasn't, yeah, I mean, you started and you think, oh, this is going to be really cool. I'll help some people. This was next level. And now all of a sudden, people whose books were on my shelves that were legends are reaching out to me saying, hey, can I come on your show? Because you're one of the top influencers in personal development. And, a quick Google of influencer taught me what that word meant. And then I was kind of off to the races. And I realized, okay, I've got this platform. I need to leverage that platform in a way that I can help as many people using some expertise that I have. And so as a clinical psychologist with a background in technology, I realized the industry that I wanted to disrupt was the assessment industry. It's, in my experience, the greediest industry on the planet. It's largely controlled by two companies, and the majority of the assessments out there aren't overly incredible, I'll say. I don't want to disparage any one instrument, but there's pros and cons to all of them. But I was a huge fan of LG, the Korean consumer technology company, and the way that they design products. I had read a book about this, and they essentially will take, if they want to make a new vacuum cleaner, they go buy all the best vacuum cleaners in the market, and they sit there and they rip them apart, and their engineers whiteboard all the things that are awesome and that they love about these products and everything that they think sucks, right? And then they build it from the ground up, design it from the ground up only with the good things. And so I said, okay, well, that's what I want to do in the assessment industry. And I want to really create gold standard tools in a lot of different ways. We started actually in the B2G space. I had no interest ever in being B2C. And we started with trauma tools for veterans and first responders. And this was pre-COVID. We then moved into addiction and recovery. We're the only addiction tool in the world that addresses the things that can help a person abstain from abusing drugs or alcohol, as well as risk factors. Everybody talks about risk factors, but nobody's talking about these strengths and resiliency points. We then moved into the corporate world, peak performance, moved into athletics. These were kind of natural progressions for me. And I avoided the consumer space like the plague, because I was told it's like the Wild West and it's a different animal, and you need to learn about things like funnels and landing pages and direct marketing and all these things that I just didn't know anything about. And I said, nah, I don't want to be there. So I was rolling along, JM. I was at the top of my game. I was killing it every day. I would get up, I would do my morning routine, and I would bike for 15 miles on my stationary bike. And I was doing all the things I was supposed to do. And then, and the last day of June 2020, I had a stroke, and again, almost died. And I know in the interest of time, because there's good content we're going to get to talk about, fortunately for me, because of my background, because the hospital told me I didn't have a stroke and they wanted to discharge me without blood thinners. And I told the ER doctor, who might have been a resident for all I know, I don't know, but I just said, listen, I said, I know more about stroke than everybody in this ER. And I didn't mean that to be narcissistic or arrogant, but I literally trained under a phenomenal neuropsychologist and saw patients from the Cleveland Clinic. Like, I know stroke. And I know that the CT scan they give you only shows potentially one kind of stroke. They could miss another kind of stroke altogether, which was the kind of stroke that I had. And I told them, you have to give me an MRI, and you're going to do it right now. And I stared them in the eyes, and they gave me the MRI, and the stroke itself was literally less than a millimeter off of a part of my brain called the basal ganglia. I won't get wildly nerdy, with your audience and put them to sleep at the wheel. But this is the part of the brain, the basal ganglia, which is involved in speech and motor movement. So when you see somebody with advanced Parkinson's and they're shaking and they don't have control over those things, and that's your basal ganglia. So the difference between me being here right now, talking to your audience, was literally like that small. I can't even, with my fingers, I can't even show you how small the size was. So that's the second time that I've had a really, really close call. And when somebody who was my age, who eats right and doesn't drink and smoke and never done drugs, like I was the model, I thought so anyway, the model of health, right? And they freak out and they start sending me to all of these specialists, all of these ologists, because nobody wants to be the guy that misses the obscure thing that might have caused this and get sued. So there is a degree of risk management and kind of protocols they go through in, the CYA. And that's what they did. And they sent me to everybody. Oh, he could have cancer. Nah, I didn't have cancer. Oh, it's got to be this. It's got to be that. Everything was negative. However, when they reviewed all of the results, and I'm sitting there with my neurologist to me, I says, Richard, we got to look at some other things because all of your labs, all of your results show nothing. And he says, let's talk about stress in your life. let me stop you right there, doctor. There's no stress in my life. I said, well, how many hours are you working? And this really pissed him off. I said, oh, I don't work. I love what I do. And then he kind of scrunches up his brow and he says to me, how many hours a week do you love what you do? And I said, about 80. And my day starts super early. I have this routine, and then I work until my kids come home and they go to bed. I'm back on the laptop till around like 11:30 or 12. And he said, here's the thing. He said, and I can't believe I have to tell you this, given what you do, but stress is stress, good stress or bad, work is work, whether you like it or not. And if you don't reduce your hours, this is going to happen to you again. And the odds were astronomical that you didn't have a long-lasting or permanent impact from this. But if it happens again, it could kill you. And so my wife is kind of like freaked out, right? Her she's there and her head's in her hands. He'll never stop working. He's an animal, right? And because we as entrepreneurs wear it on our chest, right? Like we pride ourselves on crushing our obstacles and we can power through anything. And so I committed at that time, okay, 25 hours a week for the rest of my life. Never on a Friday. I'm going to change everything. And so that began this process for me. And again, there was a recovery from the stroke, although I did it much more quickly than anybody thought that I could. And I walked in and I said to my company, to my guys, all right, remember I said no consumer tech? I lied. We're going to create the world's best assessment, of which there really wasn't one anyway, not one empirically validated. And it was going to really focus on work-life balance. Because if this could happen to me, who thought I had it all together, what about people, particularly in this pandemic, that are struggling either financially or they're overwhelmed with stress or all of these things? And so we created that. But I am really like a lightning bolt hit me. And I said, okay, like I have to get this message out to people and teach them how to balance their lives, particularly business owners, because I think, entrepreneurs in particular are the worst offenders of going on these romantic crusades. And we tell ourselves these things like, oh, I want to be successful to provide a legacy and financial security to my wife and children, or I want to do this to make the world a better place. Like, we don't start businesses for the purposes of ruining people's lives, right? Like, we have these noble goals, but they allow us to justify actions that can harm us in a really, really big way.
Yeah, brother. And that's where I want to dive into, because it's not like you said, hey, I'm going to stop helping people. You actually figured out a way to be, I would say, extremely efficient. And I'm curious to dive into this a little bit, because you're accomplishing at an exceedingly high rate. You're just not grinding, if you will, all the hours that you were before. So I definitely want to talk about work-life balance, but I want to talk about that because you're right. There is a code of honor or badge of honor, whatever you want to call, I sleep 4 hours a night and I'm going to go crush it. And literally one of my recent guests just went over this, and I try never to stop anybody's beliefs, but it's one of those things that I am concerned with. I know 8 hours for like 99% of the world, they have to have it. There's a very small group of people that cannot can function with less. So a long-winded way of saying, how are you being so darn efficient, brother? Because it's not like you stop churning out stuff. You're really producing amazing stuff.
I'm producing more than I've ever produced, actually, from content and technology products. So there's a couple of things that I started to do. I used to be like a parakeet with shiny objects in it, right? Like a little bright thing you dangle in front of me. If I was on LinkedIn or somebody reached out to me on LinkedIn, hey, let's talk about collaborating, right? I'd get so excited. And my schedule would be filled with these Zoom meetings, many of which were an absolute waste of my time and the other person's time. And I don't want to do that at all. And so wherever you are in a business, you have to understand what your goals are. And I'm a huge believer in what's the famous quote, right? Like you're the average of the 5 people you're around. Like Jim Rohn talks about that. And there's actually really good neuroscience behind that as well, that he didn't understand at the time, but now we know that he was absolutely onto something. And so I think the problem with these just collaboration, that's a very vague and seductive term, but you might connect with somebody who's so far off from where you are or where you want to be that it's a waste of your time. And so I created a filter that I use, and I would encourage everybody to use. And what I do is the filter basically is the governor of who gets on my work calendar. And not my personal calendar. Like you might not fit all these check boxes. You and I could still be friends, but you're not gonna, no way in hell we're gonna have a work meeting. And so it goes like this. The first funnel is this person, do they care more about helping people first than they do generating profit? Not saying profit is bad at all, but do they want to help people, or do they just want to ram something down somebody's throat as much as they can and make as much money? So if there's an altruistic flair to them and what they're doing, tick, right? They get that first checkbox. The second one is, are they the chocolate to my proverbial peanut butter, right? That is, do our offerings together, are they significantly better than they are by themselves and add a greater degree of value to the person? And then the third box, and this is different for every person and depending on where they are, is would this relationship generate X number of dollars for me and them? If the answer is yes, you get on my schedule. If the answer is no, you don't. And so that by itself reduced radically the number of hours I was wasting, and the quality of the relationships that I was developing went through the roof, because I know what my financial goals are, and I'm only setting meetings with people who could help me achieve them, and me theirs. And so that was really the beautiful thing. So that was the first thing that I did. And I would say, of all the things I did, that was probably the most impactful. The other thing that I would really suggest you do is, when you're thinking about your to-do list, your task list, I break these down. These are what I call my 4 Ds. And if I'm going to do something, so the first D is do. If there's something that needs to happen, or I think it needs to happen, if I get excited about it and it benefits my business, then I do it. And it's either a hell yes or a hell no, right? If I don't like, hell yes, I'm going to do this, right? If I don't get that feeling, then it's a hell no, and I don't do it. And so then there's 3 other possibilities. There's delegate, that's the second D. Who can do this better than me? You talked about early on in this recording, and you said, there's stuff that you suck at, right? So like, if there's something that needs to be done that you suck at, delegate it in any way you can. Get it off your calendar. The next D is, do you need to delay it? Is this something that even has to happen right now? You might not have to act on it this week, this month, this quarter. Delay it. Or the final D is drop. If it's something that, it's just busy work or really adds no value, just drop it. But so now you're doing a couple of things, right? This in concert with the funnel. You're only getting the right people on your calendar. So you have a much better usage of your time. And then from a task standpoint, you're only focusing on those things that get you excited, those things that you're good at within your zone of genius, to quote our friend Gay Hendricks. So if you start doing that, you're already so much better off than most people. Another thing that I would really advocate you do is build time into your calendar for you. And so for me, like I have this natural buffer between 3 and 3:30 because my kids come home at 3:30 from school. And so 3 to 3:30, sometimes 2 to 3:30, just depends on the day, is always for me. Whether it's, watching something on Netflix or calling friends or whatever, but I force those things into my schedule, because if you don't, you're always going to make this excuse in your mind. Oh, I could take another meeting now. I could go do this and that could generate revenue. You really need to build self-care into your schedule. And it's funny because we used to, I think self-care used to be a buzzword until COVID hit and people started killing themselves. And I don't say that cavalierly to minimize that at all, but it's the fact of the matter is, if you are rested, if you are in balance, if you are in harmony and you're managing your stress, and part of that is doing the things that you love, helps with that, you're going to be a much more successful business person, a better partner or spouse, a better mom or dad. Like these things are really, really critical. And one other thing that because I've just thrown like a million things at you, but I do think this one is just as important as the other ones. You really need to know your number and why. I would imagine that, and I more than imagine, because I've done this on stage many times, where I will ask people in the room to hold up it by show of hands, and these are business leaders, these are entrepreneurs, executives. How many people know the number monetarily of how much money they need? Very few hands go up.
Small number, I guarantee it.
And the fewer, and then I ask a follow-up question. Okay, so of those of you who know your number, how many of you can definitively tell me why that's the number? And then almost all the hands go down. And so if you're working just to be this beast that's going to grow this machine, like, cool, that's great if you know what the number is. So for me, I know my number. And so once I've hit the number, anything over it is gravy, and that's good. But if you're an entrepreneur, if you're running a business and you have a monetary goal and you hit it, well, now everything beyond that takes away from something else. So one of the things that I'm really grateful for is, because I have the control over my schedule, I'm able to go to my kids' school and I'm able to see them in school plays, or when it's bring your parent to work day or special persons day, whatever, they have all these days, right? I'm always there. I'm always there. And I'm usually the only dad. And so, sure, I could do more podcasts. I could write a book, another book. There's all these things that I could do at that time. But once I have hit my number and I understand my why for that number, if I'm going above and beyond that to a significant degree, it's going to take away from these other things I care about. And nobody on their deathbed says, geez, I wish I worked more. I wish I spent less time with the people I care about. And so, these are things that I've discovered that can help people, because I think we get into these traps. And, whether you're a business owner or not, what COVID has done, and particularly with the work from home crowd, is there is very little separation between your workspace and your personal life. And this has been eroding for years because of technology, right? When laptops could come home with people and they could call in on their dial-in connection and get their email, and then there were pagers and there are all these things, right? Like, we're now at the beck and call of somebody, whether it's an employer, a prospect, a customer. That's a problem. That's a huge problem. And so the onus is on you, and nobody usually says to you, hey, you don't have to respond to this email at 9:40 at night. What they say, well, they don't say anything, right? You just get an email at 9:40 at night and somebody having to put an exclamation point in it, so it's high priority, even though it might not be. But they expect you, like the culture of work in this country has changed, and that just got gasoline poured on it when people started working at home due to COVID. And so it's so important to have that separation. I actually took my work email app off of my phone and my tablet. So outside of my work, now if there's like a massive emergency and our digital storefront goes down or something crazy happens, there are people who know how to get in touch with me. I'm not saying, if the house is on fire, don't call the fire department. But I am saying and suggesting that probably 99 out of 100 times the house isn't on fire, right? And so, that's something else that you need to do, that or strive to do, is to, have the separation, let between 5 and 9 or 5, whatever times that work for you, let that be personal time, family time, recharge time. Because, otherwise you get caught up in this perpetual unending cycle, right? Caught up in the matrix, right? It just never ends.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. Less is more so often. And that's what I'm hearing. Look, you get that little dopamine from the email, so you keep get back to it. But the fact is, every time you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. Mm-hmm. Specifically, in your case, your personal health. Specifically, in your case, perhaps your kids, by working those 80 hours. And you discovering and putting these boundaries in place have allowed you to be a better employer, a better parent, a better everything, I would imagine. And you call that work-life balance, which I totally agree with. But it's so interesting with and this is why you're downloaded so many places. You didn't get deep into neuroscience, which you could have. You could have said, this is why this is happening. But that's why these are so scary, these cell phones, right? Setting those boundaries is so important, because every time you go to social media, boom, they're really smart people that develop these apps. That's why you keep going back to it. So I'm curious to get your technical background to Sure. not that you have to tell me the resume, because it's robust, but how can people set these boundaries so that they're fighting a battle they can't win? These tech giants are going to win that battle unless you set proper boundaries.
So, I have some authority on this. My dissertation actually was on the impact that social media and technology has on personality functioning. So I started studying this over a decade ago. And in a nutshell, it's bad. So let me tell you some of the things it does to your brain. Number one, you mentioned the dopamine hit. So there's a pleasure response in the brain that happens when you take a drag of cigarette, off a cigarette, or do a line of cocaine, or somebody liked your Facebook post. From a neurobiological standpoint, that's the same mechanism. And so our bodies feel good when we get that hit. Oh, look, somebody thinks I'm worthwhile, right? Because that's the people, and this is not tinfoil hat stuff. This is science, and this is not new science either. We know a few things. If you've ever seen the movie Network that came out in the 1970s, everything about that movie is true today. There's information media, and though the delivery of this has changed, it used to be you'd sit in front of your television set at 5 and 6 o'clock for your local news, and then watch Dan Rather's at 6:30 for your evening news. But the news was designed, it was packaged, it was formatted in such a way to scare you, excite you, kind of over and over again, those two things. They're going to talk about sports. Oh, the home team won. Great. They want you to tune in after the break. There's a reason why sports was always the very last thing they would put on a telecast, right? Unless your team won the World Series, they're not leading with sports. They're going to lead with things that freak you out, like weather, like storms, if there's a storm. Otherwise, they put weather towards the end too. But so they know, advertisers know how you react, and they tease certain stories and information to get you to come back after the break, because if you're going to watch through the break, you're going to watch a commercial. That's how advertising dollars work. It's all about money. Like to think that this is about anything but money would be ludicrous. Social media has taken that on steroids, because what they've created, instead of 5:30, 6 o'clock, 6:30, they've created a 24-hour customized information cycle to you based on the things that you appear interested in by clicking. Their algorithms are really, really advanced. They're scary, actually. I think, if Skynet and Terminator would ever become a thing, it would start out of the neural networks based on social media. And so what they're going to do is put things in your feeds over and over again that they think you want to see, excuse me. And so what that does is a number of things. There's one thing that will happen. So if you're just talking, not news, but if you're talking about posts by, say, friends or family, and most people, this came about in the early 2000s, when the tools were available for consumers to create websites. Back in the day, at the beginning of the internet, they were all text-based, and you needed a developer, and they were very convoluted. Like now today, like a grandma, a 90-year-old grandma, could figure out how to make a website with GoDaddy. Well, those tools started showing up around 2000, and for the first time, people were making personal websites. And what we found, the research shows, is this began the birth of the trophy case phenomenon as it relates to the internet, where people were posting these exaggerated selves that they wanted the world to see. And people do that on social media. You've got your neighbor posting, look at us at this fancy restaurant. Oh, we're on this 5-star resort in Cabo San Lucas, and our family's amazing, and everybody's smiling. And so you might say to yourself, why don't I have that life? You don't see the arguments that couple's having because they can't afford their mortgage the next month, right? Like you don't see the kids are disconnected, and there's all this strife. But all people tend to post is how glorious life is. And in fact, there's an inverse correlation in the research, which means the more one is true, the opposite the other is. The more one posts the self-aggrandizing, look at me, I'm awesome kind of posts on social media, the less happy they actually are. But you don't know that. You don't know that. Why? Looking at those posts. So you get envious, and you start questioning yourself, and you're worried about my life not being good, a lack of fulfillment. So that's one thing that social media does to us. The other thing is it is making us more rigid and less flexible in our thinking. So the greatest examples of this really are the most recent 2 election cycles, because what we started seeing with Trump and Clinton was remarkable, in the sense that you would see in very large numbers, oh, you're a Trump supporter, unfriend, right? Oh, you like Hillary, boom, unfriend, right? And so you were seeing that people were making judgments about others and removing any dissenting viewpoints other than their own from their feeds. So what that does is it reinforces the position. And so this cognitive bias gets, exacerbated in a really major way, because if all you see are people that are going to reaffirm a belief you have, even if the belief is wrong, it's going to be more difficult for you to be flexible in your thinking and change your mind. So what social media is doing, in a nutshell, is it's making us miserable, and it's driving us further apart from each other. And, the data suggests that those things are not getting better, they're getting worse. In the last election cycle, even though this happened in pretty big numbers with Trump and Clinton, it was significantly worse with Trump and Biden. And that's a huge problem. It's a huge problem when this is bleeding into other areas of our lives. We are now incapable of being in a room with somebody who has a different point of view than ourselves. And we as a society cannot optimally move forward and thrive if we're unwilling to explore differences and say, okay, like you believe X, I believe Y, we're all human beings. Let's see what we can do together. So social, and I think we went on a bit of a tangent, but social media, for all of the things that it's cool that, you know, a grandma in Idaho can go see, you know, pictures of her grandkids, you know, in Tennessee, right? That's cool. But the technology behind it and the consequences for society are hugely problematic, Jan.
I appreciate that, man. And again, I know we could dive into this even deeper. I guess being aware, guys, just being aware. And I definitely want to, time is ripping on us. It's unbelievable. But the science of helping others, brother, because that's what you specialize in. You know the science. You are passionate about helping others. Where are you going with this, man? What is on the forefront for Dr. Richard and everything that you're doing?
Well, you know, with my show, we have a call to action, the hashtag My Daily Helping Movement. And the goal is to get 1 million people every day to commit acts of kindness and post them in their social media feeds using the hashtag My Daily Helping. The way that I did that was a tad, sneaky is the wrong word, but I did certainly build neuroscience into that, because I understand from a habit formation standpoint that if we get people doing something every day that feels good, they're going to do it over and over. And the thing is, we are, and we know this through science, we're biologically hardwired to feel good when we do things for others. And to bring it back to the social media thing and the selfies, because of the technology, which has really shifted us to want to put a light on ourselves and, you know, get all these, you know, hits on Instagram and everything else, we've become much more selfish as a society. And so if I hooked up real-time diagnostic imaging to you and anybody listening to this right now, and GM, I handed you $1,000 and you randomly gave somebody else $1,000, and we looked at the brains, we looked at the brains of the person receiving $1,000, we looked at the brain of a person who gave $1,000, they light up in exactly the same way. There's an ancient mammalian reward system, and it's called the mesolimbic pathway. And when we do things for other people, it naturally feels good. It releases hormones that are good for us. One of the things that gets released is oxytocin, that promotes trust. And there's a lot of really great research around oxytocin that actually shows the higher levels we have of oxytocin, the healthier we actually are. We mitigate stress more meaningfully. So particularly now, like, that's a good thing, right? Being as healthy as possible. And so, you know, for me, because I know that if I can get more people doing acts of kindness and more people feeling good, more people excited about their lives every day and what they're doing, it's going to raise all of us up together. So that's what I'm trying to do with altruism.
I love it, brother. And again, who doesn't want those positive hormones? And I love the give as much as the receive, right? Because both have to take place for us to, that's just the way the universe works. And again, you know the science behind it. I just know, look, there's energy. You give, you receive. Otherwise, it's out of balance. So let's get behind that, man. Let's get 1 million people going on the daily helping. I love it. Speaking of, where can they connect with you online, Dr. Richard? Because you clearly have a lot of knowledge. We didn't even get into your 501c3, which I would love to dig into maybe on the next episode. But where can they connect with you, brother, and really support what you're doing, learn more about what you're doing, these assessments? Because I think there's so much for anyone and everyone, whether it's social media related, whether it's work-life balance related, whether it's just, I don't want to have a stroke, I want to help the world. How can I connect with Dr. Richard? We
all don't want to have a stroke, for sure. So the mothership is drrichardshuster.com, Dr. Richard SHUSTER.com. And that has links to my charity, Every Kid Rocks, links to the Daily Helping, my podcast, links to my technology company and some of those assessments you're speaking of. And I bought every domain configuration of that spelling every which way. So I challenge you to spell Dr. Richard Shuster and not get to my website. But everything's there, and you can reach out to me there as well. But would love to have you stop by, and would love to have you join our mission.
Well, let's get on it, guys. I mean, look, he's a really intelligent guy who has had some traumatic life experiences that have shaped what he's doing, and he wants to help more people. Let's help him out with that. Brother, I appreciate you coming on and sharing so much wisdom. I could ask you so many questions more, and so I think that's just going to lead to the next episode, which I look forward to at some point. But, brother, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. It's been great, and I hope this added a lot of value to everybody who's listening.
There's no doubt about it. Selfishly speaking, I had an amazing time. I didn't even dive into the neuroscience, which I totally geek out on. You guys go check it out. Let's hop on. Let's get 1 million people going on the daily helping. I think it's an amazing goal, and I think we can absolutely help accomplish that. So until next time, you guys, remember, your mindset matters. We'll talk to you then. Have a great week. Thank you so much for listening. If this content is delivering value to you, please make sure to subscribe, rate, and review us. That helps us build this community, and that is what we are all about. Building this community as big as we can, helping as many people as we can, and deliver as much value as possible. Be sure to head over to letsgowinpodcast.com for information on my coaching courses, and make sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Let's Go Win 365. Let's go win and transcend in life.
This is the Let's Go Win podcast with your host, J.M. Ryerson.